Welcome to Don't Retire, Graduate, the podcast that asks you what you want to be when you grow up so you can graduate into retirement with purpose and passion. I'm your host and valedictorian, Eric Brotman, and today we have a guest, Clifton Corbin, who was a business consultant with 2 decades of experience when he left the office to become a full-time stay-at-home dad. During this time, he authored his first book, Your Kids, Their Money, focused on providing parents with the skills and tools to teach financial literacy to their children. I can tell already we're going to have a lively conversation and we're kindred spirits. Clifton, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
There's so much I want to ask about the stay-home dad thing because I have some good friends who went that route, and to me, first of all, it's kind of an amazing thing. But to me, I think if I was home a lot, I would putter around and things would be not good. In fact, my wife has said I'm never allowed to retire because I'd be puttering around the kitchen. She doesn't want that either. So tell us your story and a little bit about how that trajectory took you to do the things you did and make those decisions.
Sure. So with regards to staying at home, actually, let me go back a little bit further. So I talk a lot about money. We're, as you said, kindred spirits. So that started when I was a little kid. I was a money nerd before it was cool to put it on shirts. I was, so curious about money. I was always learning more about money, always trying to learn more about money. And then I went off to university and did, what so many people do. I made a mess of my finances. Fast forward, I got out of it and I realized something I needed to do was to give back, to find ways to help, the next generation avoid some of the mistakes I made. With regards to staying at home, I've got 2 young kids at home. And when my son was going off to elementary school, we noticed that he was pretty anxious, and we knew, having him do the after school care and all of that would probably not help with his transition to school. So I took a leave with the idea maybe I'd go back, maybe I wouldn't. We, messed around with the finances and realized it wasn't necessary for me to go back. It did mean, retirement was pushed off quite a bit, but it didn't mean we had to have 2 working parents, at least not 2 full-time working parents. And then fast forward, my daughter came around and it's like, again, we don't want to have the after school care. And it's just made sense for a while. And we talked about it as like my partner and I, we talked about having a parent at home. Like that's kind of how we grew up when we were younger, went with one parent at home for at least part of it. So we wanted to recreate some of that for our kids.
Got it. No, I think there's a lot to that, and there's a lot to the decisions around school and around aftercare, and I'm a Gen Xer. I think I'm older than you, my friend, but I'm a Gen Xer, which meant we were latchkey kids to a given extent, usually unsupervised, and sort of walking ourselves to the bus to get to school and stuff that kids really don't do anymore in a lot of ways, which we could talk about whether that's good or bad, nonetheless. But to make that kind of decision, you said retirement has to be put off for a while, and I would argue you're already retired. And so let's talk about what retirement is. And I don't mean retired like not working. I mean retired like a sense of independence and a sense of your ability to do what it is you want to do. That feels like retirement already. And it doesn't mean you're sitting around with your feet up. I understand the difference. What it means is that, to me, retirement is not the absence of work. It's the absence of needing to work. So if you're in a position where you can do that, that's a healthy thing.
I totally agree with you. And I'm same generation. Well, I agree you're probably older than me, and I won't say how I guessed that, but I agree we're probably in that same generation.
Thank you so much. Let me tell you, you know what payback is. If this wasn't a family show, I would tell you what payback is, but I can't do that.
You offered me some. I'm just offering some back. Okay, so with regards to retirement, you're right. I would also probably agree with what you said. I would say, I've got the freedom to do the things that I want to do. But I'm in a partnership. My wife still needs to work to make all of this work. So as a partnership, we cannot be retired on an earlier time frame. So as an individual, I've got the luxury to be able to do what I want with, a little bit of access to my time and have choice over that. But as a collective, no, we're not in that position yet.
Makes perfect sense. So how old are your children?
So my son is 10 and my daughter's 8.
Okay. So I'm the proud parent of a newly minted teenager, which is horrifying. To have a teenage girl in the house is a horrifying thing. But trying to teach her about money has been an incredibly challenging thing. And I know this is something you're very passionate about, and you've written a book on the subject. So let's talk about some of the early money lessons maybe that you learned or experienced, good or bad, and then how you tried to translate that into your own parenting. And then we can talk about the book in a bit.
Sure. So like I said, I was a money geek as a little kid. So I was super curious about money. But it really revolved around two things: earning money and saving money. So I had a lot of first jobs, like even as like a youngster, like the paper route, the lemonade stand. There was a moment where my dad was a mechanic. He's an academic, but he had a moment where he went back to being a mechanic. I bought the oil for the oil changes wholesale and sold them retail. So I didn't get an allowance. I got a dividend check. So I've been, from a very early age, making money has always been something that was really fascinating to me. But then, like I said, I went off to university and I realized I didn't understand credit. I didn't understand most of the aspects of financial literacy. So earning, saving, nailed those, got those down. But, what do you do with credit? How do you manage debt? How do you use it to your advantage or not? Insurance, just wealth creation in general. Like there's all these aspects and facets of financial literacy that I just did not get access to at an early age. So I've tried to make sure that, through my book and through my talks and through all the other things that I'm doing, I'm trying to make sure that young kids are getting access to all of the pieces of financial literacy. So hopefully when they're off on their own, they can draw on some of these things that they've learned while they're at home with you, as their, as a parent, as their guardian, as their advisor, and then they can apply it to their own lives.
So trying to make money lessons relevant and age appropriate is something a lot of people struggle with. First of all, money's still taboo. People don't talk about money. And a lot of families don't talk about money. And so if you're one of those kids who watches your parents fight about money, you could have real baggage around it before you even know the value of a dollar, so to speak.
For sure.
How do you keep this age appropriate? At what age did you start your own kids on some type of money journey?
Sure. So I usually say, especially for like the super young kids, you really need to go where they are. So for my son, I think I started talking about money when he was about 4 years old. I tried to introduce an allowance with him, and I realized, this just doesn't work. Like he's not old enough. He can't do the math for it. It didn't work. So we just brought it back to playing games, role-playing games, like turning the bedroom into like a grocery store or a restaurant, and doing all those fun activities for him at a young age, with the cash register. So we're doing games and we're talking about money, but we're not doing it in a way that was overly cumbersome or complicated for him to understand. And I've tried to continue with that. So what I try to do is just introduce, your stories. So kids love to hear our stories. They're fascinated by our journey. So I try to, encourage, I just talk about what happened in my life. Like I talk about the time when, I lost a job, or I talk about the time when I got that first job, and when the money I saved or the money I didn't save and the ramifications of that. So I tell my stories in hopes that my kids, will resonate with the fact that, this person that they know has gone through this journey. So that's one way of doing it, especially for the older kids. Like they're probably not going to do role-playing games with you, but they're probably still fascinated by your life lessons. So that's another way that you could just introduce money concepts in an age-appropriate way. Because the last thing, like you said, if you're arguing about money or money is something that's a challenge in your life, you don't want to bring that to your child. That's not the idea. You want to bring it to them in a fun, engaging way. So whether that's through games, playing Monopoly, telling your stories, reading books. There's so many, like I've got a list of great kids books from like basically preschool all the way up to teenager on my website. And any one of those books would be a great resource for kids to start hearing about some of these lessons and doing it in a way that's fun for them. That's not, sitting them around the fireplace with a lecture.
Well, that's good, because that doesn't work.
I
found allowance not to be that particularly helpful either. Although we did the 3 jars for a while, where we had some money go to charity and some money go to savings and some money go to fun, and that was impactful until it wasn't. And there was a point where that's difficult. I mean, you want your kids to have an abundance mentality, not a scarcity one, but you also, I think, and I'm imposing my own will on you, so push back if that's not the right message. But I think even though you want them to have an abundance mentality, you don't want them to take it for granted. So
I agree with you.
How do you teach grit while still having that abundance mindset?
I agree with you. And so for me, when it comes to the allowance, I like to say, what is the purpose of the allowance? Is it just to give your kid money so they have money? No, it's another learning tool. It's another opportunity for them to start practicing money habits, whether that be transacting, saving, donating, just counting, whatever it is. So the allowance only has so much benefit, especially as your kids grow out of it. But what you can do, especially if, you've got a teenager in your life, is switch that allowance to a budget. Like you have budgets that the money that you're planning to spend for your child, whether that be, lunch money or toiletries or what have you, have that, or even clothing, back to school, just a few examples. I like the idea of like giving them access to that budget and then have them manage that budget. So again, they're not just getting an allowance and then that's it. It's an allowance without the conversation, an allowance without the discussion, an allowance without you coaching and helping and advising them really is nothing. It's useless. You really need to have both. But like I said, you've kind of got the teenager in your life now. This is the time where you want to kind of transition to managing a budget. But with regards to your specific question about grit, making sure that they're not just, looking for a handout, I don't give them much. Like they don't get a whole lot from me. Like they're going to get enough to, hopefully start building up that habit of saving. But if they really want to go out and get something, they still have to go out and earn it. And I think those early jobs really start teaching them, how to have that positive work mentality. My son, for example, he started up a baking business over the summer, went to a bunch of farmers markets and sold. It taught him how to plan. It taught him how to budget. It taught him how to like manage a float. So all of these things he's learning at 10. And that's not coming from the allowance. That's coming from his desire to have more money than the allowance would afford him. And his desire to, make people happy and bake and do this fun activity that he enjoys. But I really feel like those first jobs give you an opportunity to kind of help your child learn some of that grit and some of that resilience that you want. I find that hard to do with the allowance because the allowance, like I said, it's really a means to practice the transactions and all these other habits. But it can only, like you said, in your words, it can only get you so far.
So let's talk about the book. What inspired you to take pen to paper and put a book together? It's a heavy lift. It's hard. Writing a book is not easy. So tell us about that.
Sure. So I kind of give you a bit about my money journey. So I started off, being very fascinated about money and then, making a bit of a mess of my finances in university and then kind of figuring out after. And like I said, my objective was to help the next generation avoid some of those mistakes. And then when I looked back, I was like, well, what's a tool that I can offer to help with this? And one of the things is to help parents have these conversations, give parents the resources. So that's the why behind the book. It's to make sure that, parents have the resources, have the language, have the full picture of financial literacy that they can then offer to their children. It started as a blog. I feel like a lot of these projects start as a blog. I was listening to a past episode of yours with Tiff, and I think her project started as a blog as well. And it really is, and I love the blog because it's just, it's an opportunity to start, getting some thoughts off of your chest. But I had an interview with someone and she said some iconic words to me. She's like, a blog is good, but a book is better. And I was like, you're right. So I took the concepts of the blog and then I started to flesh those out a little bit more, did some research, and just, you chip away at it bit by bit. But it came together really quickly because it's like I said, you said it yourself, I'm very passionate about this. So I was very excited to do it. And it's just the first of many. I've got a second book that I just released. It's not totally mine. It's a revision of The Richest Man in Babylon that I worked on with my son. Yeah. So I'm sure you know the book, The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I've been encouraging folks to read this book forever. I think it's a wonderful book. It's got great lessons in it. I tried reading it to my son, who I mentioned is 10, and his eyes just glazed over. He's like, I don't know what you're saying. So I said, all right, well, why don't we see if we can make this better? Make it so that you do understand it. Make it so that it's, not like the book came out in 1926. So let's give it a refresh. So he and I worked on that. So again, it's just trying to create products and resources and different services that I know will help parents and kids get these concepts so that once they need them, they have them, they understand them. Or if they need to, they can just seek it out and they have a resource there that they can use.
So writing a book, among other things, is a lesson in time management and tenacity. So I give you credit for that. Having done this myself and thinking I may never do it again, I'm 3 down and 0 to go. I think, although you always have to update some of these if there's content in them that's timely, which sometimes there is. Are you a writer by training? I'm an English major. Did you study English in school, or did you just love to write,
No.
or how did that work?
No. None of the above. In fact, I often joke if computers didn't come around with spell check, I might still be in elementary and high school right now because I can't spell. My grammar is terrible, but I do like to read, and that came in my later years. I do enjoy books. My first degree is in computer engineering. My second degree is an MBA. So writing isn't something that necessarily is my thing. I feel like I've gotten better at it as I've done it more. But my father, as I mentioned, he's an educator, and I've always wanted to help and support. And I just, you take what you have and you work with it and you refine it. Like you said, it's all about managing your time and being diligent. To be honest, the book was written in 2019. My kids came home, and the idea was that I was going to publish it in 2020. 2020 happened, so I did nothing. I shelved it for a year, and then 2021 came out, and I was like, okay, I really want to get back to this. So even it's not even just the writing; it's really just being passionate about the subject matter. Like if you're not passionate about what you're writing about, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I did publish in 2020 and couldn't do a book tour and couldn't do any of the things that would have marketed the book. But I was so excited to get it to market and to get it out in the world that I went ahead and did it. You probably did it better because waiting that year when people were freaked out, it wasn't a bad, it was a bad time to publish anything or put anything out there.
The wait was not voluntary. Both my kids came home to do the online at-home schooling, and it wasn't an option. I was full-time stay-at-home dad, full-time teacher, principal, administrator. I was the everything, trying to hold it all together, and it was not a good year for us. So it wasn't an option to even try to get it out that year.
Well, it worked out in your favor. I believe that.
I think so.
I mean, things happen for a reason, right? I mean, I think it worked out in your favor. So we talk a lot on this show, and it sounds like you've heard it before. In fact, Tiff just celebrated her 5th anniversary of her show, which is phenomenal. She's doing a lot of great things. We're trying to help change the mindset for folks around financial independence. And there's so much material. There's so much content out there. Content's been democratized. It's no longer your 3 primary networks that tell you what they want you to hear for half an hour every night. Now it's millions of independent creators, which is a wonderful, amazing thing. It also makes it overwhelming to sort of separate what is wisdom from what is drivel. And so how do you distinguish or how do you separate your own work? And you said you had a list of children's books. How do you separate those? What is the criteria that you use to say this is really, really good and this one's not so much? Like how subjective is that?
That's a great question. That is a great question. It's the challenge that we're going to have going forward. I don't know. Again, my background is tech, and I remember a while ago a book came out called The Long Tail, and it was basically highlighting the fact that in this generation and in these years coming forward, it's really about filtering and how do we filter information to make sure we're getting, quality versus, as you said, like the drivel that can come out. I've been doing this for a while. I've been reading about financial literacy. I've been reading about economics. This is not just like a part-time thing for me. So I know what quality content is. I also, for my book, I use, journal articles that have been reviewed. I'm not just using, Wikipedia or another blog post to come up with the data for my book. I try to use credible sources, and those sources, usually have some backing to give them the credibility. So it's hard. I don't know if I have a great answer for you other than, when I talk to folks, I say, find those sources that really resonate with you. One, like yourself or Tiff or myself, what have you. But you also have to make sure that what you're seeing isn't totally against the grain, right? Like the reason why I love The Richest Man in Babylon, it came out in 1926, but the principles that it talks about still work today. Like managing money, while you're right, it's taboo. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it enough. The concepts really haven't changed that much. Like we have, new fintech companies and different products and crypto and all of these things. But the concepts themselves, trying to live off of less than you make, paying yourself first, all of these principles, they don't typically change. Like we haven't learned anything better. So I use my baseline, which is this giving the same messages that I know work, because I've tested them. I know they work for me. And I've also seen, other professionals out there mentioning these same resources. So it's a valid question, but you really kind of have to use your filter and find that resource that resonates with you.
I think there's a community. You're part of FinCon, right? You met at FinCon, and so, which I happen to think is still the greatest poorly kept secret ever, because there's thousands of people show up and so many people have never heard of it, which is kind of an amazing thing. I also can't figure out why more financial advisors don't go, but I digress.
It was my first, and it was wonderful.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I've been to 5 or 6 of them. And 2023 is already on the calendar. I mean, it's just something I don't miss. Same. Because the energy in the room, the collaboration, the sharing, the quality of people and the quality of content it's a community. It's a special place. Like I showed up, I didn't know what a money nerd was till I showed up at my first one, and then realized, oh my gosh, I found my tribe. Yeah. Like I knew I was a nerd and I knew I liked money. I didn't know it was a thing. So it sounds like I said, we're kindred spirits. We discovered that together, which is kind of neat. So let's talk about education, and specifically the cost of education. I don't know where you are geographically, though you said you went to university rather than saying you went to college, which makes me think either Canada or Europe. Are you Canadian. In the U.S.? You're Canadian. Okay.
I'm in Canada.
When you say I went to university,
Yeah, but I have 1 degree from Canada and my master's is from the United States. So I've bridged the borders.
All right. Well, I wasn't 100% sure, but when you said I went to university, I said it's either the UK or Canada.
Yeah, I did. I tried to swap it for the audience, but yeah, you picked up on that.
No, it's fine. Listen, it's the same thing, and we've had a number of Canadian guests on. In fact, I interviewed somebody recently who said I was the most Canadian American he'd ever met, just because I could speak I could speak Canadian because I've been all over the country. I love Canada. So, but let's talk about the cost of education. And our audience is worldwide, although it mostly is American, at least North American. College or university has gotten so outrageously expensive that at some point, I think there might be a tipping point where some of it doesn't make sense. How do you help counsel folks who want the best for their children? We all want the best for our kids. How do you counsel them when there are so many choices out there, and when this particular choice feels like it's less of an automatic path now? How do you do that?
You nailed it. I don't know if it is an automatic path now. Like there's so many, man, my brain's exploding on that question. So one, there's the cost. The only way to manage the cost, you could start saving early. One of the things that I've done, I should say my wife and I, we stopped giving our nieces and nephews any Christmas or birthday presents. It goes straight into a 529, just because, like you said, the costs are astronomical. But I don't know if it is necessarily an automatic now. You kind of, like the idea of, that semester where you kind of figure it out, you can't afford to do that if it's going to laden you with all this debt at the end of it. So what I've been saying, and I know you kind of asked this question, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but what I've been saying is, instead of asking our kids, what do you want to do or what do you want to be when you grow up? I've been trying to reverse it and revise it to say, what's something you can imagine yourself doing for 5 years, in the next 5 years, for just 5 years. Like I want the window to be 5 years, because as you and anyone else who's probably got a degree out there knows, we're likely to have multiple different jobs, potentially different careers, lots of different jumps. So what I want our youngsters to know is that, that degree won't define you. It won't define your career. It's the foot in the door to get that first job. It's the foot in the door to kind of get your feet wet, to kind of get a sense of what the working world is. And then maybe you decide this isn't for me, but you still have the degree. So what I've been trying to, like I said, trying to refocus it to say, what's something that you're really passionate about, but you don't need to put all the pressure of, this is the decision for the rest of my life. This is the career or the job or the degree that's going to take me from here till I retire. Because I feel like that's too much pressure to put on children. So that's kind of the reframing that I've been trying to put. And if the answer to that question is something that doesn't necessarily require schooling, then maybe you don't do schooling right away. Maybe you don't go to post-secondary right away. It doesn't mean that's now off the table. It just means, and I'm sure you've seen this, where you meet the mature students, they're more dedicated, they're more passionate, they're the best students you're going to find, because they've decided to, in addition to all of the life responsibilities they have, they've decided to now come back to academia because they know the benefits that will give them. For example, I'm just using someone in my own life. My dad is, he's 73, I think, and he went back to do his PhD a couple of years ago. Why? Because he's passionate about it. He sees value in it. He's a great student because he knows the value of this degree. When you're 17, 18, it's still fluid, right? Like, you're still kind of figuring it out. So one, make sure you kind of have a sense of what you want to do, not for the rest of your life, but for 5 years. And if you can dedicate yourself to, the education and that first job, it can be a little bit easier as far as like the guidance, like what you do. With the financial piece of it, you have to save early, seek any grants and bursaries or scholarships that you can. There's no, one answer fits all for this one. It's really student dependent.
I'm anxious to see how this pendulum continues to swing in terms of whether higher education becomes a path for just about everyone, or whether we start to see that shift, because to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for an undergraduate degree that really is only an entry ticket, for that kind of money, you could buy a business, a good one, a profitable one.
You could buy a couple houses, start real estate, be the next real estate mogul.
Lots of things. And that's not to downplay education. And
no, not at all.
With my own daughter, I desperately hope that she wants to continue her education, but I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know whether she wants to go work toward her PhD, or whether she wants to be an entrepreneur, in which case it's a totally different kind of path. So I guess we'll wait and see. So you hit it on the head. You asked, what do you want to do for the next 5 years? I'm not letting you off that easy. I actually do want to know what you want to be when you grow up, because we stop asking people that when they're young. And since we've decided you're almost as old as I am, what do you want to be when you grow up?
So it's so funny. When I was trying to figure out, my educational path, I ended up in engineering. I've always had a passion for business. So I did the engineering degree, I did the business degree. But I remember when I was younger, I had a couple of people, mentors, my parents, and they're like, what about teaching? And I was like, no, I have no interest in teaching. And only to find myself teaching. This is what I'm doing. I'm doing it in a different route. I'm doing it via my book. I'm doing it via workshops. I'm doing it via, talks with parent associations, what have you, but it's what I'm doing. It's what I'm enjoying. So if I had to answer that question, I want to be a financial literacy teacher, but not in a classroom. Not in the classroom. I want to do it in, settings that give me a little bit more intimacy, whether it be, like a virtual workshop or an in-person workshop or what have you. So I've gone full circle from I would never want to be a teacher to I think that's kind of my calling.
Okay. No, I like that. Are you able to, as a father of two and a writer and an entrepreneur, do you have time to do a lot of philanthropy? Have you found organizations that work toward financial literacy that you're able to help with, or that you're passionate about?
I'm still working towards that. So with regards to philanthropy, like I do a lot of volunteer work. It's one of the benefits of being a stay-at-home dad, and that I have a little bit more control over my time. So I've done quite a bit of volunteer work, specifically with financial literacy. I've done a lot of pro bono talks, and that's kind of the way I've been able to give back so far. But I'm still looking for organizations that I could pair with and partner with, because I feel like and you mentioned it with FinCon, we all get better when we're working together. Like it just, the community is what makes this work so well. So I'm still looking for those communities. And if, you know, you're listening and you're like, hey, this guy might be someone I'd be interested in partnering with, you know, send me an email. I'd be happy to connect.
Where in Canada are you?
I'm in Toronto.
Toronto. I believe Toronto has at least one chapter of Junior Achievement.
They do. That's an organization that I've been. Oh,
so if you've done some volunteering with them, I think they're unbelievable. And for those
I haven't yet, but I did hear about them. Yeah.
For those listeners who don't know Junior Achievement, it is a financial literacy behemoth of an organization that helps school age kids all the way through learn some lessons about money. They do some incredible programs, and I would say check that out. And they are international. I know there are chapters here in Maryland, and I know there's some in Ontario as well. So you should be all set. So last question. The last question is, because you're a teacher, and I expect A, work on this, Clifton. I need an extra credit assignment, because you're not allowed to assign homework to our audience, but you can give us an extra credit assignment. What would that be today?
If you have a child in your life, if you've got, you know, nephews, nieces, your own children, just make talking about money something that's not taboo. Just talk to them about money in a fun way. Give them one story, one fun, you know, whimsical story about how money had an impact in your life, that will, you know, get them thinking about, you know, some financial concept, whether it be saving, earning, investing, donating. Just give them one fun story, and I think it'll make a world of difference.
Excellent advice, and I hope folks will take it. Where can people get your book? Where can they learn more about you and your workshops and your programs?
Sure. So you can find me on cliftoncorbin.com. You can access my books there as well. Amazon.com or Audible for Your Kids, Their Money. That's my first book. It's a parent's guide to raising financially literate children. My blog, again, cliftoncorbin.com/blog. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm kind of all over the place. So just or you can always shoot me an email if you have a question about, you know, some of the things I talked about here, or just in general. You can reach me at hello@cliftoncorbin.com.
Excellent. We'll make sure to put that in our show notes when the show goes live. And I can't thank you enough for being here. And I trust I will see you in New Orleans in 2023 at FinCon.
The ticket is purchased. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I will look forward to it. Thanks for being a guest. You were terrific. And I know there was a lot of wisdom here, and I hope folks enjoyed it.
Thank you, Eric. And I appreciate you. One, I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate the show. Like, thank you for doing this. This is just so useful. Like you were asking before about where people can find good information. You are it. So thank you for doing the show.
Oh, very kind. Very kind. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for listening and watching today. We'd love to hear from you. So please leave comments or send us a message at don'tretiregraduate.com. If you enjoy our show, don't keep us a secret. Share with your friends and family so they can join you on your journey to financial freedom. We'll be back next week with another installment of Office Hours, and in 2 weeks with another engaging guest. For now, this is your host, Eric Brotman, reminding you, don't retire, graduate.
Securities offered through Kestra Investment Services, LLC, Kestra IS, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Kestra Advisory Services, LLC, Kestra AS, an affiliate of Kestra IS. Kestra IS or Kestra AS are not affiliated with Brotman Financial or any other entity discussed.